At 11:03 a.m. January 31st, 1943, American tank crews laugh over open radios as they roll into Fight Pass, joking about capturing Rommel's hat as a souvenir. 37 seconds later, the lead Sherman explodes without warning, an 88 mm shell. The laughter stops. Within 8 minutes, 46 burning Shermans litter the valley floor. The radios go silent except for one transmission, a 20-year-old gunner from Iowa screaming for his mother while his tank melts around him. German observers watch through binoculars counting wrecks. One officer mutters, "They fight like children." How did boys who'd never seen war survive an enemy who'd perfected killing them, and what did it cost to learn fast enough to stay alive? What happens when overconfidence meets cunning? And how does an army learn when there's no time left to learn? By November 1942, the legend of Erwin Rommel is dying in the desert. After catastrophic defeat at El Alamein, his once invincible Afrika Korps has retreated 2,500 kilometers westward into the mountains of western Tunisia. The Desert Fox is cornered now, desperately short on fuel, spare parts, ammunition. His panzers limp into defensive positions with cracked transmissions and fuel tanks running on fumes. Officers quietly discuss evacuation. The war in Africa, everyone agrees, is nearly finished. But across the Tunisian border, something is coming that Rommel has never faced before: American confidence backed by unlimited industrial power. The U.S. 1st Armored Division arrives in Algeria that same month, 70,000 men and 400 brand new M4 Sherman tanks, still smelling of factory paint and American steel. They roll off the ships, believing everything their officers told them on the Atlantic crossing. These are not the hardened veterans of Tobruk who learned to fear the 88 mm gun. They are farm boys from Iowa who enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor and have never seen an ocean before boarding the troop ships. Factory workers from Detroit who learned to drive tanks just 8 months ago in the California desert. College students from Texas who can recite tank specifications but have never heard a shot fired in anger. Their briefings paint a clear picture. Rommel has finished his supply lines, severed his division shattered by Montgomery's hammer blow at El Alamein. British intelligence confirms the Afrika Korps is a spent force limping toward inevitable surrender. And the American Sherman, with its gyro-stabilized 70 mm gun, thick welded armor, and superior reliability, is more than a match for the aging German panzer foes. The math is simple. American factories are producing 5 Sherman tanks for every panzer Germany builds. Numbers will decide this war, and America owns the numbers. The crews believe every word because they want to believe it. They've trained hard in the Mojave running maneuvers until they could operate their tanks blindfolded. They know their machinery inside and out, how to clear a jammed breech, how to change a track under pressure, how to maintain formation discipline across broken terrain. They believe American engineering, American determination, and American industrial might will steamroll whatever resistance remains. Some officers privately predict the North African campaign will be over by Christmas. What none of them understand is the ground itself. The desert is not the obstacle course they trained on in California. It's a killing ground perfected over 3 years of brutal combat between men who learned their tactics by watching friends die for every mistake. They don't understand that open terrain favors the defender, that dust clouds announce your position for miles, that German 88 mm guns can punch through a Sherman's frontal armor at ranges where American guns can't even reach back. Most critically, they don't understand the man waiting for them in those mountain passes. Rommel may be short on fuel, but he's rich in something far more valuable: the hard-earned knowledge of exactly how inexperienced troops behave under fire. He knows they bunch up at choke points. He knows they trust their armor more than their terrain awareness. He knows they advance in predictable formations at predictable speeds. And he knows precisely where every killing ground is. Every pass, every valley, every ridge where overconfident boys can be slaughtered before they understand what's happening. The Americans roll into Tunisia in January 1943 with their tank commanders standing tall in open hatches, radios crackling with eager chatter about souvenirs and quick victory. They advance in parade ground formations across open valleys, raising dust plumes that announce their positions hours before they arrive. They are loud, confident, and absolutely convinced their superior numbers and modern tanks make them unstoppable. 300 kilometers away, Rommel watches reconnaissance photos of those American columns and allows himself a cold smile. His staff officers see it and know what it means. The desert fox has found prey that doesn't know it's being hunted. The desert has a way of teaching lessons, but only to those who survive the first one. Erwin Rommel sits alone in a canvas tent outside Sfax, hunched over a sand-stained map spread across an ammunition crate. It's 2 a.m. He is 51 years old, his face hollow from illness, his hands trembling from medication and exhaustion. His chief supply officer has just delivered the verdict fuel for 3 days of combat, maybe 4 if they abandon half the supply trucks. His panzer divisions are ghosts. Some companies report just 8 operational tanks. Mechanics cannibalize wrecks for parts that no longer arrive from Germany. The Luftwaffe has vanished. Every daylight movement invites Allied fighter bombers. Every instinct tells him to conserve forces, dig in, and wait for evacuation orders that will never come. Then his intelligence officers enter with radio intercepts and everything changes. The Americans are transmitting in the clear code so primitive a schoolboy could break them. Young voices joke about collecting German helmets as souvenirs, ask when they'll see real combat, wonder aloud if Rommel is even still alive or has already fled to Berlin. He spreads reconnaissance photographs across the map. American columns advancing in perfect V formations like training exercises. They move across open terrain at predictable speeds, raising dust plumes visible for 20 kilometers. They bunch at every crossroad. Their reconnaissance is non-existent. Their flank security could be defeated by a single machine gun. Rommel studies the photos in silence, then looks up at his staff. His eyes carry that predatory focus. His veterans recognize the look that means he's found a fatal weakness. He speaks one quiet sentence. They do not know what they are doing. 300 kilometers west, American tankers experience their first combat night. Private Eddie Kowalski from Pittsburgh sits in his driver's seat, riding home by flashlight. The tank reeks of diesel hot metal and nervous sweat. He tells his mother the armor makes him feel safe, that he'll be in Berlin by summer. He doesn't mail the letter. Something feels wrong about those words. Corporal James Thornton from Abilene lies awake under his tank, staring at unfamiliar stars. He enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, driven by rage and patriotic fury. Now listening to distant artillery beyond the mountains, he's terrified of the one thing he's never admitted, that when the shooting starts, he'll freeze, that he'll shame his family. He whispers a prayer, asking not for safety but for courage, just enough not to be a coward. Sergeant Frank DeLuca from Brooklyn has seen hard men in hard situations, working the commercial docks. But even he feels the weight as he settles into the tank commander's position at dawn. The Sherman's interior is brutally cramped, 5 men in space designed for efficiency, not comfort. It's suffocatingly hot even in the cold morning. When the engine roars to life, the noise makes communication impossible without screaming into the intercom. His loader sits wedged between ammunition racks that will either save them or cook off and kill them all. His gunner cranks the manual traverse wheel, watching crosshairs swing across empty sand and rock formations that could hide anything. His driver has only a vision slit that reduces the lethal desert to a postcard-sized rectangle of glare. Their battalion commander's briefing echoes in DeLuca's mind. German tanks are slow, outdated, outnumbered. The feared 80 mm is mostly anti-aircraft, not anti-tank. American steel and resolve will overwhelm any resistance. Trust your armor. Trust your crew. Trust the plan. But DeLuca recognizes what nobody's saying. None of their officers have fought Germans before either. They're all guessing, operating on assumptions, sending them into terrain none of them understand against an enemy who's perfected desert killing for 3 years. What no one has told these boys is that courage without knowledge doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a target. And what no one has told them is that Rommel has already positioned the 10th and 21st Panzer Divisions in camouflage positions overlooking every valley they're about to enter. German gun crews sit in silence right now, watching approach routes with the patience of men who've done this 100 times. The Americans button up their hatches as sun breaks over the mountains. Some whisper prayers to gods they haven't thought about since childhood. Others joke nervously to fill the terrible silence. A few sit frozen, gripping controls with white knuckles, trying not to think about what it feels like when steel tears through steel and fire fills the compartment. They advance toward Fied Pass, believing their training and tanks will be enough. They have no idea they're driving into a masterclass in how overconfidence dies. In war, belief is not armor, and the desert does not forgive what training forgot to teach. At dawn on January 30th, 1943, 96 M4 Shermans roll into Fied Pass in a textbook V formation so perfect it looks like a parade. The lead platoon raises a dust plume that hangs in the still air like a smoke signal visible for 20 kilometers. Tank commanders stand tall in open hatches scanning empty ridge lines. The radios crackle with confident chatter. Nobody sees the danger. From concealed positions 2 kilometers away, German forward observers watch through binoculars and calmly radio coordinates to 80 mm anti-tank guns dug into reverse slopes. The massive guns have been in position since midnight, completely invisible from the valley floor. Behind them, Panzer IVs wait with engines off, crews silent and motionless. They've done this before. They know exactly how this ends. At 11:03 a.m., the first 80 mm shell screams across the desert at 3,000 feet per second. The lead Sherman erupts. The round punches through frontal armor, detonates the ammunition, and launches the 30-ton turret 15 feet into the air. It crashes back upside down. The crew never knew what killed them. The second Sherman swerves and takes a round through the side armor. It explodes in a fireball. The third tank commander screams to reverse, but an 80 mm round smashes through the engine deck. The crew bails out into pre-sighted machine gun fire. 3 men drop. 2 crawl behind a rock. Within 4 minutes, the column is paralyzed. Tanks collide trying to reverse. Commanders scream over jammed frequencies. Black smoke obscures everything. Crews abandon vehicles and sprint across open ground with no idea where the fire is coming from. Then the Panzers appear from both flanks, firing on the move. American 75 mm shells ricochet off sloped German armor at long range. German gunners destroy one Sherman after another with assembly line efficiency. Some explode instantly. Others burn slowly, and the screaming from inside doesn't stop for minutes that feel like hours. By noon 46, American tanks are smoking wrecks. The pass is carpeted with bodies. Wounded men crawl through sand, calling for medics who can't reach them. The Germans lose 3 tanks. Fied Pass falls silent except for ammunition cooking off and desperate cries of men trapped in steel coffins too hot to approach. The survivors stumble back covered in blood and diesel. They can't explain what happened. It was supposed to be easy. 3 days later, humiliated commanders order another assault at Sidi Bouzid. Nearly identical plan, massed armor across open ground in daylight. Intelligence says resistance is light. Officers need a victory to erase Fied Pass. They send the tanks forward. This time Rommel springs a double envelopment. Americans advance into an empty valley. Then Panzers appear simultaneously on both flanks and sweep behind them, cutting off every escape route. The formation is surrounded and methodically annihilated. Radios fill with panicked voices calling for support that isn't coming, reporting enemy everywhere, begging for withdrawal permission. 103 Shermans are destroyed. Entire battalions surrender when ammunition runs out. The desert floor becomes a graveyard. Blackened hulls, blown turrets, tank tracks leading nowhere. German crews move between wrecks, collecting dog tags. The survivors stop joking on radios. They stop writing optimistic letters. They stop standing in open hatches. The confidence evaporates like water on hot sand. Something fundamental has broken, not their courage, but their certainty. They've learned what it feels like to be hunted by someone who knows exactly how to kill you. They've learned what burning friends smell like. They've learned that American tanks die just as easily when the crew doesn't know what they're doing. And they're understanding a terrible truth: the war they imagined and the war they're fighting are separated by a gulf measured in burning steel and shallow graves. What kills faster in war enemy fire, or the arrogance that made you an easy target? On February 19, 1943, Erwin Rommel launches Operation Stormtide, his most audacious gamble since the retreat from El Alamein. The plan is brutally simple: strike Kasserine Pass with 3 converging armored columns, shatter the demoralized Americans, split the Allied line in half, and drive straight through to the massive supply depots at Tabessa. If it works, the offensive buys the Afrika Korps months of survival. If it fails, nothing changes. They're dying either way. The initial assault is devastating. German artillery pounds positions that have never experienced concentrated fire. Green infantry units break and flee. Tank destroyer crews abandon guns without firing. Entire companies vanish into chaos. Radio networks collapse into static and screaming. Officers file contradictory reports based on rumor and panic. Within 24 hours, Rommel's panzers penetrate 16 kilometers into American territory. The breakthrough threatens complete rout. Panic spreads faster than the tanks. Units fall back, abandoning equipment, ammunition, wounded men. Officers issue retreat orders, then countermand them. Nobody knows who's in charge. The entire Allied position in Tunisia teeters on collapse that could delay the European invasion by a year. Then on February 20th, George S. Patton arrives at the shattered headquarters in Tabessa. His convoy roars in at high speed, scattering staff officers. Patton emerges wearing polished boots, twin ivory-handled revolvers, and a helmet bright as a mirror. His face carries an expression that makes veteran sergeants straighten their spines, not anger, but something colder and more dangerous. He listens in silence to panicked reports from officers who haven't slept in 3 days. He studies maps showing the German penetration. He reviews casualties and abandoned equipment. He asks 3 questions about ammunition reserves and German positions. Then he walks outside and personally relieves 2 senior officers for cowardice, incompetence, and failure to maintain discipline. His first order is brutal: no more retreats. Any unit falling back without authorization will have its commander court-martialed immediately. His second order is tactical: every anti-tank gun, tank destroyer, and artillery piece will be repositioned to hull down positions along Kasserine ridge lines within 6 hours. His third order is delivered personally to traumatized tank crews who've spent 2 weeks watching friends burn alive. He doesn't give speeches about democracy. He tells them the truth. You will hold this ground or you will die on it. There is no third option. None. The soldiers don't cheer. But something shifts. Chaos is replaced by something colder and harder. Orders become clear. Positions are assigned. Ammunition is redistributed. Fire zones are marked. Overlapping fields established. For the first time since landing, the American crews understand that survival requires more than courage or machinery. It requires tactical discipline, intelligent use of terrain, combined arms coordination, and the willingness to let the enemy advance into killing zones instead of charging into ambushes designed by men who've perfected this for 3 years. Patton doesn't promise victory or deliver rhetoric. He tells them they're outmatched, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. But if they hold 48 hours, British reinforcements arrive and German supplies run out. If they can't hold 48 hours, the North African theater collapses and Europe's invasion is delayed indefinitely. The crews return to their vehicles in silence. They check guns, count armor-piercing rounds, study terrain, and memorize firing positions. They don't discuss heroism or patriotism. They discuss fields of fire, ammunition loads, and escape routes if the position is overrun. And they wait for Rommel's veterans to test whether American soldiers can learn fast enough to stay alive. When retreat is no longer an option, even the greenest soldiers discover what they're capable of or what they're not. Kasserine Pass becomes hell on earth. On the morning of February 20th, the 10th Panzer Division advances up the narrow valley in tight columns, expecting the same panicked resistance they shattered at Fied and Sidi Bouzid. Instead, they drive into carefully prepared defensive fire from Americans who have learned from catastrophic failure. C Company of the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion is dug into exposed positions along a rocky ridgeline with 6 M3 tank destroyers mounting 735 mm guns. The position offers excellent fields of fire but is tactically terrifying flanks, completely open ammunition strictly limited, and the crews have no armor protection. One accurate German shell kills everyone. When the 1st Panzers appear below the young company commander, a former insurance adjuster from Ohio who's been in combat 11 days gives one instruction: wait until 800 meters, make every shot count. The Panzers advance confidently. At exactly 800 meters, the Americans open fire simultaneously. The first volley strikes 3 Panzers. One loses a track and slews sideways, blocking the road. Another catches fire, black smoke pouring from the engine. The third reverses behind rocks, its commander screaming for support. The Germans respond with overwhelming fire. High explosive shells slam into the ridgeline, throwing up geysers of rock and dust. The American position erupts in shrapnel. One tank destroyer takes a direct hit and disintegrates, killing the crew instantly. For 6 brutal hours, the Americans hold. They fire, reposition fire again. The M3s have no armor. One hit kills everyone. The desert heat is unbearable, turning gun shields into searing metal that blisters skin. The noise is deafening, continuous explosions, diesel engines, screaming men. Shell casings pile up in brass hills. Loaders handle rounds with blistered, bleeding hands. Gunners peer through sights with bleeding ears and dust-choked lungs. Then the Panzers change tactics. They split into 2 groups and flank the ridge from both sides. The position is about to be overrun. The commander radios for support. Silence. He orders vehicles to reverse down the back slope, but terrain is too steep. One destroyer tips sideways, rolls, and crushes 2 crew members beneath 5 tons of steel. The 3 remaining destroyers are trapped. German Panzers close to 400 meters. 300. The Americans keep firing with mechanical desperation. Every shot has to count because there won't be time for another. At the moment, collapse seems certain. American P-40 Warhawks appear overhead at low altitude. The lead pilot rocks his wings and points urgently south toward a narrow, hidden trail over the ridge that German maps don't show. The surviving destroyers immediately break contact and race for the trail engines, screaming tracks, throwing rocks. Some vehicles make it, others don't. Crews who escape carry wounded men on their backs, stumbling through rocks and darkness. No one looks back at the burning wrecks. No one discusses the friends trapped inside blazing vehicles because there was no time and the heat was too intense to approach. By nightfall, the German offensive at Kasserine has stalled, not because they were defeated, but because the Americans, for the first time in the campaign, forced them to pay in blood and burning panzers for every meter of ground. Survival in combat is not about heroism, it's about making the enemy bleed for ground they thought was free. By March 1943, the American armored forces in Tunisia are unrecognizable from the confident, inexperienced units that landed 3 months earlier. The survivors of Fied Pass, Sidi Bouzid, and Kasserine have learned brutal lessons written in 200 destroyed Shermans and shallow graves of friends who burned alive in steel coffins. They no longer advance in parade formations. They no longer trust frontal armor to protect them from experienced gunners. They no longer underestimate Rommel or assume industrial superiority automatically translates to victory. Most critically, they've learned to use terrain concealment and coordinated tactics instead of relying on courage and firepower alone. On March 23, 1943 at El Guetar, the rebuilt 1st Armored Division faces the 10th Panzer Division again in the defining test of their education. This time, the Americans choose the battlefield. Tank destroyers are positioned hull down along commanding ridgelines with overlapping fields of fire. Dense minefields cover every obvious approach route. Artillery observers pre-register coordinates on every choke point. The crews dig in camouflage positions with desert brush and maintain absolute radio silence. The Panzers advance at dawn with the same confidence that served them so well in February. They move in tight formation, expecting the same green troops they shattered 8 weeks ago. Instead, they drive into a meticulously prepared killing zone designed by men who've learned exactly how armor dies in the desert. The first wave hits concealed anti-tank mines and stops dead tracks blown off crews bailing into pre-registered mortar fire. The second wave maneuvers around disabled vehicles and is caught by devastating flanking fire from hull-down tank destroyers on hidden ridges. The third wave calls for Luftwaffe support and counter-battery fire, but American fighters control the skies and counter-battery radar immediately suppresses every German gun that reveals its position. For 12 hours under merciless sun, the Panzers hammer the American line. For 12 hours, the Americans hold with discipline unimaginable in January. The heat is brutal. Temperatures inside tanks exceed 130 degrees. Dust is so thick, gunners can barely see targets. Crews fire until barrels glow red-hot, pour canteen water over metal to cool it and resume firing immediately. Ammunition runners sprint between positions under machine gun fire carrying shells on their backs. Wounded men refuse evacuation and stay at gun stations because there are no replacements. Radio operators coordinate fire missions while blood pours from their noses in suffocating heat. Medics crawl between burning vehicles, dragging out wounded, their hands blistered from sun-heated metal. By evening, the German offensive collapses. 31 Panzers are destroyed or disabled. Dozens more are damaged and forced to withdraw. The 10th Panzer Division pulls back in disorder, leaving dead and wounded on the battlefield. The American line holds firm. Not a single German tank penetrates. It's not glorious or cinematic. The exhausted tankers are too drained to celebrate. They sit in dirt beside battered vehicles, hands shaking, drinking lukewarm water, silently counting how many friends didn't survive the day. But something fundamental has changed. For the first time, American armored forces have stopped a major German panzer offensive cold using professional tactics. The improvised methods, refined at Elgetter hull-down positions, shoot-and-scoop maneuvers, coordinated artillery and air support defensive terrain use are immediately codified into Doctrine. These lessons are systematically taught to every new crew arriving in theater. They're refined in training, incorporated into manuals, and carried forward through every campaign. The battered veterans of Tunisia become the instructors who train armored divisions that will storm Normandy, break across France, and smash through the Siegfried Line into Germany. Victory is not measured in tanks you destroy, it's measured in lessons you live long enough to teach. On May 13, 1943, the Afrika Korps formally surrenders in Tunisia. Over 250,000 German and Italian troops march into Allied captivity, the largest Axis surrender since Stalingrad. The North African campaign is officially over. American and British newsreels celebrate the great victory with triumphant music and heroic narration. Rommel is already gone, secretly evacuated to Germany by Hitler's order before the collapse, sparing him the humiliation of surrender. The desert slowly swallows the evidence. Hundreds of destroyed tanks, American Shermans and German Panzers, rusted together in sand, remain scattered across battlefields for decades. Turrets blown off, hulls scorched black by fires that burned for days. Bedouin tribesmen stripped them for scrap metal. Tourists photograph the wrecks. Wind-blown sand fills crew compartments. Time erodes every identifying detail. Within a generation, most people forget the campaign nearly ended in catastrophe. Official histories written by staff officers who never smelled burning flesh or heard men screaming inside tanks emphasize ultimate victories, El Alamein Patton's counteroffensive, the final surrender. They mention Fied Pass and Kasserine only briefly, euphemistically described as setbacks or learning experiences. The statistics are sanitized into neat columns nobody reads. Over 700 American tanks destroyed in 3 months, more armor lost than any comparable period of the war. Thousands killed, burned alive, or captured. Entire battalions annihilated in the opening weeks. But these facts don't fit the narrative of inevitable American victory, so they're quietly minimized in reports filed in archives nobody visits. The survivors remember everything with terrible clarity. They remember the specific smell of burning rubber mixed with diesel and flesh. They remember friends screaming inside sealed tanks, pounding hatches jammed or too hot to touch. They remember pulling wounded through narrow hatches while machine guns stitched sand around them. They remember the weight of deciding which wounded to carry and which to leave because there was no time, no space, no help coming. Some never speak of it. They lock those memories away and refuse discussion even with family. Others can't stop. They tell the same stories compulsively at VFW halls and reunions, making children uncomfortable with details too specific and terrible to forget. They visit memorials in Tunisia and stand silently before marble plaques listing names without context, without explaining what those names cost. The tactical lessons are encoded in doctrine, absorbed into manuals transmitted to the next generation. The techniques work, they save lives in subsequent campaigns. But the emotional cost of learning them, the terror, the guilt, the grief that never fades, doesn't fit in manuals. That knowledge lives only in the men who were there, and when they die, it dies with them. The desert remembers nothing. Wrecks corrode into rust. Cemeteries are maintained by foreign governments as diplomatic obligations. History moves forward and details blur. But the men who fought carry something no memorial captures: the knowledge they were broken by combat, painfully rebuilt under fire, and sent forward again. They survived not because they were heroes, but because they learned lessons faster than the enemy could kill them for mistakes. Wars are won by nations and celebrated by politicians, but survival is always desperately personal, and the true cost is never honestly recorded in official victory reports. The young men who climbed into Shermans and rolled into Tunisia in January 1943 believed war would be an adventure. They believed their tanks were superior and practically invincible. They believed their training was sufficient and their enemy already defeated. They learned otherwise in the worst way imaginable under direct fire and terrain they didn't understand against a veteran enemy who knew exactly how to exploit every mistake and kill them efficiently. Those who survived Fide Pass, Sidi Bouzid, and Kasserine weren't heroes in any traditional sense. They were simply the ones who lived long enough to stop making the fundamental mistakes that killed everyone around them. They learned to read terrain like a language, to distrust their own confidence, and to respect the enemy's professional competence. They learned that survival requires genuine humility, that proven tactics matter infinitely more than raw courage, and that the dead aren't brave or cowardly, they're simply finally permanently dead. The powerful armored force that broke out of Normandy in summer 1944, that crossed the Rhine in early 1945, that liberated camps and shattered cities across Europe, that force was built directly on the charred wreckage of units destroyed in Tunisia. Every tank commander who instinctively positioned hull down on ridge lines, every gunner who patiently waited for the perfect shot, every driver who knew when to advance and when to retreat, they inherited tactical knowledge paid for in blood on North African sand. History celebrates victories and builds monuments to breakthrough moments. But the foundation of every success is built on earlier failure, and the men who paid that price are mostly forgotten. Their names are carved on memorials almost nobody visits. Their stories are filed in archives almost nobody reads. Their lessons are preserved in manuals nobody connects to the actual faces of men who learned them by watching friends burn. In the burning passes of western Tunisia, overconfident American youths were violently reshaped by fear, devastating loss, and the brutal necessity of abandoning wounded friends trapped in steel coffins when there was no time to save them and no way to reach them through flames. That education wasn't glorious or heroic, it wasn't fair or just, but it was absolutely complete. And it forged the professional armored force that would later stand on the Rhine's banks and look back across the long, terrible road from the desert, knowing with absolute certainty that every kilometer was bought with lives of men who never made it far enough to see Germany. men whose last moments were spent not thinking about victory or freedom, but simply screaming for help that never came while fire consumed them in darkness. The desert remembers nothing. The wind covers the tracks. The rust consumes the steel. The sand fills the graves. But one lesson remains carved not in stone, but in the survivor's memory passed down through generations of tankers who learned it cost lives to discover. In a world of steel and chaos, survival was the only victory.